So if you run multi-threaded, you have to do your own mutexing across your threads. So in the past year, there were a lot of code improvements. There were 2 security advisories, and we had the OpenVPN accreditation. From the code perspective, there was a lot changed to support the OpenVPN integration, because OpenVPN was a totally separate product. They used OpenSSL. They were fully hooked into OpenSSL for doing the cryptography on their part. So there was a great guy at, who's called Adriaan de Jong, which did a large number of changes for making OpenVPN being able to have a generic crypto layer where polarssl could hook into. PKC's 11 support was added, so for the people that do OpenSC smart card workshop after this, you can use use polarssl with the same backend, because this is the OpenSC backend. There was some new PKC's 1 changes, which are not that important, but the latter 2 are important improvements. Namely, there was a new random generator added, the counter mode deterministic random byte generator. That was named by NIST because of one of the security advisories that was added, namely the top one. There was a well-designed French number generator in polarssl as the default. It was called Havage. And Havage was very cool because it only needed timing to make proper random. 5 years ago it was still good. 10 years ago it was really great. Nowadays with cloud computing it just started to fail horribly, because there are some cloud environments that don't actually allow the RTDSC assembly call to actually get a true time. So you probably get 0 back every time you call it, and it's normally supposed to give back the real-time clock. And that gives really weak random. So we made a major change with some people on the internet. We implemented within a week the full new random generator. And second advisory at the start of the year was there was a man at the middle possible with Diffie-Hellman where you can make predictable Diffie-Hellman results. So that was not really a good part.
What are the seeds for the new one?
Sorry?
What are the seeds
for the new one? You have what's called the entropy accumulator that you can feed. By default, it uses dev random if it's available under Linux Unix environment, or the crypto API random as a seed for Windows. It uses time-based parts. It uses Havage to mix the time if it has the possibility to add extra. And it has hooking functions, so you can add new functions if you want. So it follows the NIST standard as closely as possible. So you also have the ability to customize the starting seeds, so that even if you have the same seeds, that there's still different random flowing out of the engine. So then at the start of last year, we started with the OpenVPN-NL accreditation. That really sketch a bit about how it works in the Netherlands. We have something called the VRB, which is a regulation that, forces all government agencies to use approved products for government information. And restricted information, which is the lowest level of government information, is also the most broadly used. It's what almost all the government officials use when they do their mail and do internal documents. And the regulation says you have to have an approved product. And up till now that meant Cisco and or Juniper network products, which was of course not really budget friendly. The Dutch government is trying to force the open source through its system so it becomes cheaper. But it requires some help, and that's from the NBV. And the NBV is Nederlands Bureau Verbindingsbeveiliging in Dutch, but it's a subsidiary of the Secret Service in the Netherlands, and it has the power to evaluate and accredit products for use under the VRB regulation. I have a really long history with these guys. I've used them for accrediting the products for embassies and stuff like that. So I know the flow, and the hard part is that an evaluation targets a lot of different areas, and they don't always mix very well with open source and open source mentality. So part of the evaluation in this case was the cryptography. Does it actually do what it says it will do? What security features are present? How does it work? If they want to use OpenVPN, it should add VPN in such a way that people actually have a no-hassle, secure communication with the government networks. It has to have secure design, source code is inspected, and the supply chain has to be controlled in one way or another. So if you look at the stock version of OpenVPN that's available on the internet, it has some issues from the government perspective. Namely, first, it's very easy to enable null encryption. You can just do a command line and you have null encryption. And although you shouldn't, they don't want to allow people to actually make that mistake. So you can't do null encryption if you want to do a secure government version. It uses a lot of outdated cryptographic functions or low bit sizes, which isn't really something the government gets happy from. Then there's the versioning discussion I had earlier here already, is open source products normally don't have a very strict versioning with release dates, and after that they move on to the next version, and they don't necessarily maintain the old version on all aspects. And that's something that the government gets really iffy about, especially if also dates are moving around. For the evaluation, the government wants to know at what date can we plan our officials to start inspecting your source code. And if you say it's March 1st, and on March 1st you say, well, it's going to take 2 more weeks, we had a little shift in our development, that's something they don't get happy about. And commercial companies know that already, but the open source community, they don't have the same deadlines normally as companies have for this kind of development. From a supply chain perspective, OpenVPN is distributed from the website of OpenVPN in a source code and binary version, but also via all the distributions worldwide. How do you know that if you have OpenVPN in your system, via Debian or whatever, that that's actually a correct version of the source code as it was meant to be and published from the website of OpenVPN? You don't. There's too many steps in the middle. There's no single verification of the source code and the signature on it. So that's an issue that the government sees there. And from a documentation perspective, OpenVPN was very, very limited. There was some usability documentation, but not on the actual design of the code. The people that were in the group on the mailing list of OpenVPN didn't actually know all the ins and outs from some parts of the code, because they were just core functionality. It used to work, and it works like this, so let's keep it that way. But the government actually wants to know why it works like it's supposed to do now. So, a company called Fox IT, which is a major security, IT security company in the Netherlands, took it on itself to make a government-approved version. So there's a few changes where the true code is taken from OpenVPN. Some hardening patches are applied. The building of the code is actually done within Fox IT, and they make available the packages for all the different systems with signatures, everything, and they guarantee that those versions are the same versions as the government wants you to get. So it's available on the site. It has Dutch government criteria approval for restricted level. In Dutch, it's called departemental vertrouwelijk. And it does mean it has less functionality than the actual OpenVPN. It does all the basic stuff, but all the insecure functions, insecure options have been removed. And some options you had were really gone. One of the major changes for OpenVPN and one of the major enablers for OpenVPN-NL was polarssl. The Dutch government started out with saying OpenVPN can never be evaluated because we are never gonna approve something like OpenSSL for government use. Because nobody knows how it works, and we're never gonna prove that it actually does what it should do. That was when polarssl was chosen to be put in there because it's feature compatible on this front with OpenSSL, and was used to actually make the entire OpenVPN core just use polarssl and no external dependencies on OpenSSL anymore. That does mean that, for instance, by default, you are forced to have AES-256 and SHA-256 as your crypto parameters. No choices, you can't downgrade them or whatsoever. If you use the government version, you get these crypto settings. So, as I already mentioned, for the process, there were a lot of patches for polarssl and OpenVPN, mostly done by Adriaan de Jong, which works at Fox IT. They did part hardening of the source code for OpenVPN, so removing the options. Integration, allowing integration into OpenVPN, which required a lot of effort also with the community of OpenVPN to actually make them understand why they had to switch from OpenSSL as their base library, which they used for the past 6 years, to polarssl, which most of them never knew, and some of the core people luckily already had experience with. And they actually did it. And because of that, they got into the government flow for the Netherlands. And there was a lot of documentation added to OpenVPN by Adriaan and to polarssl to actually help the government do the evaluation. So the evaluation document is actually the most critical for doing accreditation. The stupid part is it's documentation you normally would not write because it doesn't help the user. It does help you as developers, but if you are the core developers, you already know why you did some parts as you did. But it focuses fully on the security aspects of your choices, not on the design aspects of your choices. And that's normally not something any open source project would write on. And then the hard part was actually getting final versions that could be approved. And as I said earlier, with OpenVPN community, for instance, the timeline shifts over time. So when they said it was March 1st, March 15, that tends to get hard. And if you also get something like the security advisory you described earlier with the random generator, where we had kind of a floating target of how the random generator would work. Well, it would work by producing random, but actually how the internals would work and the entropy pool would work. We changed that, I think, 3 times in the last week because of discussions we had with a number of cryptographers and experts on the field. And every time we changed, the government came back to us crying, why have you changed it? We were just looking into it and we were just trying to actually get this approved. So in the end, we got to the point where it actually got approved. It was my first Slashdot front page post ever, which was cool to notice, but I was at least very happy for having OpenVPN-NL now in a point where the Dutch government can actually use it, where they are using open source now, and I know the Ministry of Defense is trying to roll it out to all their employees, which are 60,000 of them in the Netherlands. And it's becoming the basic mode for VPN in the Dutch government, which in my opinion is only a good thing. So that was the part I planned to talk to you about, but I'm open for questions on all aspects of polarssl cryptography, SSL, accreditations, whatever.